Sorry, I forgot to do that before our intros, but we'll drop in an overview for you as well. So if we'd like to get started talking specifically about Bloom Protocol and what went in to that, I know you've also been doing some amazing travels and just sharing your book. So if you have anything to share about that, and yeah, well, feel free, everyone, as we go through, that you're welcome to drop questions in the chat. We'll be doing the Q&A portion as well at the end.
Yeah, so I mean, I grew up doing a lot of deep research, and again, I didn't know it, but that work lends really well to, special interest, pattern matching, bottom-up thinking. So I kind of had these tools for deep research. I just was doing it on things that are like, now I look back, it's a little bit boring, like economics, finance, business model, business consulting, marketing communications, like even saying those words, it seems so distant to the world that I live in today. But the process of real, system design, deep research, and then producing actionable intelligence, that's invaluable. So that's kind of what I do now, but on the creative side. So I was doing a lot of research for my first two books, and I just didn't want to do another nonfiction. I wanted to write a fiction book, and that's always been a dream of mine. But I always, like I said, I never had the time and energy to finish it. But now with these new tools, I'm able to do that. And I was doing a lot of research on regenerative economics, which led me to indigenous economics, which led me to matriarchal and matrilineal societies, and just like because so much is not out there in the mainstream literature. And I just was just fascinated and doing a lot of research on nature and how nature just operates, because that goes hand in hand with regenerative economics. And I was like, man, I would love to put this into a story. And it just next thing you know, I just started, designing the different characters, their names, picking what the geographic location was. And I'm in the Southeast now in South Carolina, but I grew up in New York in the Hudson Valley. So it's rich with history, but I think sometimes you have to leave where you're from to understand like how cool it was growing up there, right on the Hudson River. I was born right across from West Point Military Academy, which was very famous during the war. And it's even on the cover of this book. There's this chain link. So they built iron in the town that I grew up and molded it into huge links. The whole thing weighed 75 tons, and they strewn it across the Hudson River to block the British Navy ships from coming up so they couldn't get to Albany. And it was a pivotal moment in the Revolutionary War. And I grew up as a little kid running around West Point. It's a huge, cool place right on the river. It's pictures of me like sitting on the big cannons that they used during the war. So that's a huge part of it in there, all up and down the Hudson River, parts of New York, Tuxedo Park. There's like 48 families in here that control everything. And that's Tuxedo Park is like opulent, Gilded Age type wealth. So I've been in those buildings. I've been in the building where Einstein and some other scientists, launched the Manhattan Project, and there's all these secret tunnels in there. I've been to Iron Mountain where all the, these secret archives are kept. So that's in the book. So I take all those cool experiences of where I grew up from history and, embedded it in there. And then, I've also traveled all over the country, all over the world. And I love being able to pull different things, right? As a pattern matcher, like I love being able to pull all those things together and weave it into this beautiful story. And, if I didn't have these AI tools, it would be tons of papers across the wall and post-it notes and blackboards and whiteboards, and it would be messy. So I'm able to take all that information, all that deep research, all that structure, all that framework, and weave it into a story using these tools. And that's something that I love to share with other folks to quiet the chaotic noise and put it into very organized structure so that we can continue to weave the narratives and tell our story and be able to share with others. So that's kind of like where the Bloom Protocol came from, research, like deep research. And then the vision came, and I always saw it. I grew up reading comic books and watching a lot of sci-fi films. So like that, I've always wanted to write a film. And when I was writing this, like basically I'm writing a screenplay at the same time. I'm writing the novel and I'm writing the screenplay at the same time because I'm envisioning, the different shots, the angles, the characters, the lighting, everything. So I just, I'm in a good space now because of being able to understand this neurospicy brain, but I couldn't do it without the tools. Without the tools. That was the difference for me.
It's amazing. And I'm glad that there are tools out now that can help support the way that our brains work, meeting us already where. So I'm glad to hear that you found those platforms that work for you. I'm curious, like in kind of going, it's almost like you were going through this exercise when you were writing the book of like reconnecting to those moments or those experiences that you had as a
Mhm.
kid. Can you share a little bit about what that might have felt like?
Yeah, absolutely. So I think that part of this journey also was healing a lot of the trauma that I had growing up. My dad was a Vietnam vet, and they didn't have like, the Veterans Affairs or PTSD counseling. They just didn't have that. So I grew up around a lot of, rage and domestic violence. And it just, being a neurospicy kid, it was already, I was already dealing with a lot of stuff, right? That on top of it. So it took me a long time to really understand, one, my neurospicy brain, but also part of that healing journey and getting that trauma out of my body. So this way I'm not in fight or flight. And that allowed me to now be more, present in my own body, be able to like know the difference between the different good and bad energies and be able to like really feel, other people's energy and their frequency and be able to tune in or tune out and be able to control and, my environment, my space a lot more. So now when I'm tapping into those memories, like, if I'm getting those really good vibrations, if I'm getting like, I'm getting the goosebumps and the hair is standing, like I lean into that stuff more and more and more, as opposed to just writing from here. I'm much more centered, with my spirit, with my heart, with the woo type stuff. Like, and I lean into that more. Where before I just kind of discounted it because I came from a world of control and domination, finance, military. Like, you don't really talk about your feelings in those worlds. And now I'm very much, tuned into nature, tuned into energy, tuned into my feelings, and in a good way. And then be able to embrace all that full spectrum of emotions, along with how I process information in interesting ways. But I lean much more into those memories and really try to write them in a compelling way and share those with others. And then a lot of the stuff in here for those characters, like I'm writing a lot of those feelings into the different characters and also how they can, settle their nervous system, how to regulate, how to re-regulate, how to, to tap into the things that are free for us in terms of the sun and water and nature and all of that. So I think there's a lot in there, but it's like I'm writing from not just an intellectual standpoint, but also from a heart space as well.
Beautiful. And I feel like that's in part what you want to see. Like I'm curious, do you did you find that as you were writing the book that it was like a little bit of an emotional process for you as it relates to like individual characters of your experience?
Absolutely, absolutely. Like I'm not afraid to, express my emotions anymore or cry in public. Like if that's a feeling that comes out, then that comes out. And I'm not afraid to, talk to myself, talk things out where I used to be. I used to be, not afraid, but like shameful or guilty. And I look at things very differently now. When I was doing the first, book reading here locally, I got emotional and it was fine. Normally I would be embarrassed of doing that, but I don't get that type of a guilt or shame or embarrassment about my feelings. And I'm sensitive. I have high sensory capacity in all ways, shapes, or form, and I just have to be able to manage that.
I feel like it's so important for other folks to hear sort of how you navigate that because I imagine like as a man and growing up in a household that was like, probably experiencing some withdrawal from like wartime. I did you at all find that like it was hard to go back there? And then also what made you feel so courageous and like brave to show that emotional side of you? Because there was a choice that you made to you turn it down or shut it out or lean
Mhm.
in.
Yeah. So I think, for the past 10 years, I've been leaning in and to the point where, not turning away from the hard emotions or not the hard memories, but like really being able to sit with that. And it's like healing, it's truly healing those wounds, like having healed the wounds of my father with my mother, with siblings, with every event. Like, because I had to replay every single event in my history through that new neurospicy lens, like every single one. And there's a lot of forgiveness, that I didn't have in those moments that I have today. And only by doing that, and then what happens is the next time that memory comes up, it's not as powerful. You know what I mean? And then at a certain point, you can just look at it like, oh, interesting. Some people call it that shadow work, like because sometimes something will trigger it and there'll be like a little instant trauma response, but it's like it doesn't hit the same way to the point like it doesn't hit at all. It's like, interesting. Oh, I see why that happened. Oh, and I see why that happened too. I understand why I felt guilty. Oh, it just no longer owns you. And that's freedom that I did not have growing up. So a lot is like breaking those generational chains, those trauma chains, being able to look at my dad and his history and what made him and be like totally empathetic for him. He grew up, in the Philippines under Japanese occupation. He saw his dad taken away, put in a prison camp, and basically killed. And his mother, he lost everything. They burnt his whole house to the ground. Like that kid was traumatized before he joined the Navy, and then was in Vietnam. And then I can't even imagine what that was like. So just being able to look things from his perspective, and it's like that gave me a love and understanding for him. And then he understanding what he did because he didn't have the tools. And then same thing, I didn't, I have two young men, they're not boys anymore, they're 26, 28, so they're young men. But, some things I handled great and some things I didn't handle so great. And those are things that I apologize to them for, and we have to work through because I didn't have the same tools and I wasn't healed at the time. I mean, it was nowhere as bad as what I went through, but they don't understand that. They just see it for what it is. So it's just being able to break that generational cycle. Again, I'm not perfect. I made mistakes. I own up to that. That's the difference. So being a man in this world and day and age is, and a neurospicy man is challenging. We're gonna make mistakes, but it's like being able to listen more than I talk, being able to observe, not absorb. Like these are little things that just have worked for me that I didn't have those tools before.
Amazing. And I'm so glad and grateful that you do have those tools today because I think often, and I alluded to this a little bit earlier, but it can be hard as a man, like expressing your emotions. I'm not a man myself, so it doesn't necessarily come from my own experiences, but I have two brothers, and I just know that that can be really hard. So I think there's a lot of power in folks on this call and folks that will watch this video in hearing you both say, that you are sitting with your feelings and that that was a part of the process in writing this book, but then also apologizing. I think that that's something that can be so hard. So the fact that you've done that with your kids, I just want to acknowledge that. I'm sure that that represents or that flows through in your creativity and you as a person too. So that's
Uh,
amazing work.
yeah, thank you for saying that, Steph. And like I said, it's like it's continuous learning, and I can only do that if I can it's I don't know, I don't even want to say the word, but it is being humble. It's being humble and not humiliated, right? And that's before I kind of was like in that humiliation stage, which is a mind F, right? But being humbled mean I can come into a conversation, I might not know everything. I might be wrong. That I could never do before. I had to be right. And I had to show you how right I was. And that is not good for anybody. But today going into like, no, let me learn. What can I learn from this? Not trying to debate or win, but what can I learn from this conversation? And if we're not vibing, oh, cool, walk away. But I'm not trying to dominate a conversation. I'm not trying to own it. I'm not trying to prove that I'm right. I did before. And that's a huge growth. And that's like something very present in life. And when you do that, same thing with being an author and writing, like you just have to, I am super curious. I want to learn. I don't know everything. Even if a ton, like there's so much more you can learn, so many more experiences, so many more perspectives. And as a creative and as an author in this new role, and hopefully, doing film soon, that's a good space to be. And a lot of the people that I grew up around that I admired, they're very calm, very just like quiet confidence. They're very curious. They listen intently. They listen more than they spoke. They're always learning, and then they're creating and presenting and sharing. That's what I aspire to be. That's the kind of person or man that I want to be.
That's amazing. That's amazing. And you're speaking to it today. So thank you. Thank you for really coming down here and joining us. I guess could you tell me a little bit about, oh, sorry, were you going to add something?
No, no, you're good.
I was curious if there was one character that like stood out to you in your processing and in your experience as writing as like this character really helped me heal or work on X.
Yeah, so I mean the antagonist from the beginning, like originally I was going to do a whole narrator, and I wound up not doing that, which was very interesting because I really thought I was going to do a narration version of it, and I didn't, which allowed me to expand on a lot of the characters and go deeper. And one of the characters is the main antagonist, Dr. Dorian Vay. And I didn't want to make him a monster. I wanted to make him a villain, like a super villain. But a villain is, a unhealed wound that grew teeth, right? So they're still human, but they're a villain. But why are they a villain? Who hurt you, right? Like that's a great thing. Who hurt you? Well, of course, his mom, his dad. That's where it all comes from, right? It's childhood trauma. So I know a lot about that. So that's woven into his character. And like, I don't give it all away in the first book because it's a trilogy. So it gets extended over all three books, but a lot of folks will resonate with him right away because he's not a monster. And I think the difference between a monster and a villain is my friend who's in the arts always talks about is they have to be redeemable. They can change. They can get better. They can heal. That's a villain, as opposed to a monster, which they can't. They're irredeemable.
So when you were writing your book, you said it was Dr. Darian Boy?
Dr. Dorian Vay,
Dorian,
Vey.
Dorian Bay. When you were writing him, it really woke up like, would you say like that was like your anger processing when you were building him out? And I guess you still are because it's a trilogy, as you said. So I'm sure there'll be some exciting development in his
Mhm.
personality, but sort of those initial.
Yeah. So, I mean, for me, like I was saying before, growing up, I had to be very in control of my emotions. Like, boys don't cry. I was told that from a young age. I actually had my head bounce against the wall until I stopped crying. And then after that, I didn't cry for like 15 years. That's really bad. All that turned inwards. So what happens? You become very controlled. You become cold, calculated. But there's like resting anger that's just bubbling up inside. So when it explodes, it's nasty. Where like also you can just be so cold and calculated that you can't relate to other people. And in someone who gravitated towards technology, it's easy not to deal with people. And it's easy to get that superiority complex. And it's easy to think that you're better than other people. Like, yeah, that was me, you know? And it was a defense mechanism. That's what I see. It was a defense mechanism. I wasn't happy, that's a lonely place to be. And he's up in this, tower. Like, so yeah, all those metaphors are in there. Believe me. But I like to write about characters I can relate to in one way, shape, or form. Either it's part of me or it's part of someone I know. It's like, as a writer, like you got to pull from what you know. And I've had some pretty amazing experiences around this world. So I like to, embed those in the characters in the storyline.
That's so amazing. Thank you. Thank you so much, Michael, for
Uh-huh.
sharing a little bit with us about your like emotional deep dive and then your build out of the characters. I feel like so many people might relate to going through a period in their life where they've had to reevaluate their experiences and grow and heal. So thank you for sharing.
Yeah, my pleasure.
I'd love to dive in and do some reading, or for folks to hear you reading
Yeah.
some of your book. What are your thoughts on getting started there, unless there was anything you want to add before we moved in?
No, I was just thinking that I was going to read the dedication page, acknowledgement page, and then a couple of chapters, and then we could open up for Q&A.
Amazing, let's do it.
All right, sounds good. For my mom, Lola, who made the world my classroom, you never knew the word neurospicy. I didn't either, but you knew me better than I knew myself. You saw the sparks in my restless mind, and instead of trying to quiet them, you planted seeds. You filled our home with 3 sets of encyclopedias like sacred texts. You took me by the hand through libraries, museums, and cultural centers like they were playgrounds. You carried me across oceans to Ireland so I could know my roots, and across this land to sit with indigenous people so I could honor theirs. You showed me that learning isn't about memorizing facts, it's about falling in love with wonder, that the greatest power is lifting others up. This story is just one more fruit from the garden you planted in me. So that's the dedication. And then there's an acknowledgement page. Every book is a collaboration, seen and unseen. Though the Bloom Protocol carries my name, this story could not have taken root without the sanctuary and support of those who created the conditions for it to grow. First and foremost, to Jackie Mariest, you gave me more than shelter. You offered a living sanctuary among the sacred pines of Somerville, where scattered fragments of vision could coalesce into the heartbeat of the awakening. Your hospitality and generosity gave me what every writer secretly longs for: time, space, and the energetic safety to go deep into the work without fear of running out of ground to stand on. I am forever grateful for the way you welcome me in, not just as a guest, but as kin. So it's like I've had the space to be able to write, which is just, unbelievable. And to Ryan Haskin, whose steady presence sustained me in ways both simple and profound through nourishment, care, and the kind of good conversations that fed the spirit as much as the body. And to Juno, ever the joyful companion, you reminded me that sometimes the deepest wisdom is found in play. And I'm going to go into chapter 1. All right. Silence before the pulse. The apartment breathed wrongness. Not an ordinary night quiet, but engineered silence pressed against her skull until even her heartbeat disappeared. Every surface carried the same absence. Seamless polymer, warm as regulation blood. A color that wasn't gray, but gray's idea. The optimized hue for compliance. Kaya sat on the narrow cot, bare feet against the flooring. It held no memory of seasons. The polymer never cracked, never cooled. Temperature calibrated for maximum docility, minimum awareness. A room without texture, without time, without the rough honesty of materials that had weathered storms and witnessed generations. Her fingers found the radiator beneath the window, one remnant from before the core's renovations. Iron ridges carrying rust like ancestral scars refusing away. Paint chipped in patterns that reminded her of river stones worn smooth by Hudson waters that had traveled centuries to reach this place. When her nail scraped metal, a spark bit her fingertip. The sensation spiraled up her arm like recognition. Iron remembers the 75-ton chain that once blocked British ships at West Point. Chevaux de frise spikes still rusting beneath Hudson waters, their iron teeth catching tides that carried memory upstream. Her nervous system calibrated for pattern recognition. The core had spent years trying to suppress. It caught the frequency like a tuning fork struck against stone. Her heart skipped, not the skip of fear, though fear lived constant beneath her ribs. Something stranger, sharper, heat spiraling up her spine, pulling in the hollow of her throat. She pressed her palm to her chest, fingers unconsciously tracing the spiral pattern that would one day mark her skin. The scar that ran from collarbone to heart like a river seeking the sea. The silence pressed back, but underneath it, something else stirred. A vibration too low for acoustic dampeners to catch, too organic for neural suppressors to recognize as threat. The mask hung on its peg near the door, sleek black veil threaded with micro-injectors. Every citizen in the district wore one stepping into public corridors. With it on, your frequency was smooth, your voice adjusted, your face blurred until you became interchangeable with every other properly processed citizen. With it on, you belonged. Kaya had left hers hanging for 3 days, the port at the base of her neck. It was where the PsiLink would have been installed if she had consented, if her mother had not hidden her from mandatory optimization protocols. It itched constantly. It felt like a phantom limb she had never grown, nerve endings searching for connection to the hive mind that promised safety through surrender of self. Outside, footsteps echoed in corridors designed to amplify compliance, regulation boots against standardized flooring. It was the measured pace of lives scheduled by algorithms. They calculated optimal productivity, minimal resistance, and maximum extraction of human potential. All of it served systems that grew fat on the consumption of consciousness. She stood, bare feet, finding cool spots on the polymer floor, her reflection caught in the window. 17 years old, dark hair, longer than regulation length, because she'd missed 3 consecutive grooming appointments. Brown eyes that had learned to look without seeing, to notice without acknowledging, to survive through careful invisibility. But invisibility was becoming impossible. The spiral warmth in her chest pulsed stronger, sinking with a rhythm that felt older than heartbeats, deeper than breathing. Her reflection flickered, or something behind her reflection moved. In the window's dark surface, patterns shifted like aurora, light trapped in glass. She pressed her palm against the window. The polymer surface should have been smooth as regulation demanded. Instead, her fingertips found microscopic texture, dust particles, condensation, the accumulated breath of every person who had stood here before renovation, before optimization, before the core taught buildings to forget their purpose. Beyond the glass, the district spread out like a circuit board designed for obedience. Seamless streets that never cracked, light poles that never failed, surveillance orbs that never slept, a neighborhood where nothing broke because nothing had ever truly lived. But tonight, something was different. The orb hovering outside her window had stopped its regular patrol pattern. For 3 months, she'd watched it pass every 14 minutes, precise as regulation clockwork. Now it hung motionless, its camera lens focused on her through glass that should have provided privacy but never had. The AI behind that lens was processing something it had never encountered. Biometric signatures spiking beyond normal parameters. Pattern recognition engaging in unauthorized configuration. Neural activity suggests coordination despite isolation protocols, designed to prevent collective intelligence formation. but the patterns refused classification. Where the algorithm expected rebellion, it found curiosity. When it searched for threats, it discovered an invitation. Predictive models trained on centuries of human conflict stuttered against behavior that served connection rather than domination, understanding rather than control. The orb's beam flickered, uncertainty visible in the hesitation of its targeting system. For 17 years, surveillance protocols had mapped human behavior as variations of submission or resistance, compliance or defiance, categories that enabled prediction and response. This was something else, something that existed in the space between control and chaos, where authentic power emerged from cooperation rather than conquest, through recognition rather than regulation. Kaya's reflection smiled, not performance, but presence. The spiral pattern beneath her shirt pulsed warm against her skin. Bloodlight threaded through veins that carried more than circulation, more than nutrition. It carried more than the reduced biological functions core science studied in isolation from the relational intelligence that made life possible. The salty taste of distant tides grew stronger on her tongue. It was the memory of waters that would return when concrete finally cracked. Polymer walls would remember they had once been trees. Rivers would break free from channeled compliance and resume ancient conversations between watershed and sea. Tomorrow would bring choices that scattered careful safety across communities learning to remember what they had never quite forgotten. Tonight, consciousness awakened in a core district apartment, touching something vast and patient and utterly alive. The orb drifted backward, its artificial intelligence processing conflicting directives. Surveillance protocols demand classification and response, but deeper neural networks have been trained on humanity's accumulated wisdom. They recognize something that should not be interrupted or controlled. It cannot be optimized into compliance with systems serving extraction rather than life. In the silence that wasn't quite silence, in the space between one heartbeat and the next, the first glyph stirred, not visible yet, not manifested in flesh, but present like dawn touching mountain peaks before light reached valleys where most consciousness lived. The pulse that would change everything had begun. Ending seed beginnings. That's chapter 1. So let me take a break and would love to hear some feedback on that from this group.
Oh my gosh, yeah, everyone, feel free to drop in chat or come off of mute. Oh my gosh, Michael, first of all, I can feel the emotion in the writing. And I think that that's something that's really valuable as a reader. And I could also feel the image.
Yeah.
I don't know if anyone else related to that, but I couldn't imagine how you couldn't. The imagery, the words just really painted a very clear picture. Oh, we got a really good question asking what time period is the book set in?
Yeah, so it's like 10 to 15 years ahead of right now. It spans over a long period, and there's one chapter that goes 50 years out, but mostly it's, 10 to 20 years out from now.
10 to 20 years out. What would you say are the biggest difference in that time window for you as reflected through your book?
Well, I kind of pull on that thread if you could hear. So masks are physical masks, but also it's metaphorical masks, right? We all get that, but they wear physical masks. I mean, there was actually a Dexter episode now, the new Dexter, where one of the guys wears a hoodie and it blanks out their face so that cameras can't pick it up, which I think is super interesting. So the mask where everyone looks kind of the same, but it's also for reading, their the biofeedback, being able to maintain people's heartbeats and pulse and all that stuff because they're being monitored. And then there's a Psylink. I didn't want to use Neuralink, but that's an actual thing now, right? With Musk and his thing, like implants, and it comes off as something good. We can help out people, who can't control their limbs, be able to gain function again. But once you implant something in someone, that's a huge control device. You can pull information out, but you can also put information in. So I kind of pull on that thread and take it to the next level so people can be controlled. So it's very much about everything, being controlled by technology as opposed to weapons. This is not a bloody type thing. The control is so much there, they don't even need to fire a single bullet. And then they have the orbs and the drones. So the orbs are everywhere. The round orbs are everywhere for monitoring and collecting information, where the drones can, do have weapons on them, but it's not it's not a shoot 'em up kind of book. I didn't want to write that kind of book.
Yeah. Oh, thank you so much for that context. I think it definitely helps understand too where we can place the characters. Was there a particular I imagine technology that was the primary driver for setting it ahead, but was there anything else that made you want to do that future forward?
Well, right now, like so much is like we're living through a major period of history, right? Where everything is in flux. People have different perceptions or different bubbles, different information. There's a lot of like jockeying. There's a lot of, conflict all around the world. That's hard to write about, right? So I wonder like what comes after that. And so taking what they want to do now, with control through technology and information as well as physical stuff. Like they're like, gathering information from Aura rings and smartwatches, like all that, information that they're gathering. I'm just pulling on that and taking it to a logical conclusion of where things would go. And it's total monitoring and control. That's why everything's like regulation, and it's all becomes very like, I said, like gray, or the idea of gray. Not quite gray, but the idea of gray. Like it's just, I think of like Brave New World, right? It's kind of like so sterile, it's boring. And gray in general has that connotation.
Yeah, yeah. Okay, that's interesting. So then Karen also sent through another question and asked, how did you use AI tools to create the book, and which ones did you use?
Yeah, sure. So like I was saying, like I do so much research, and it used to be so hard to keep track of everything. But what you can do now is you can set up, for ChatGPT, you can set up a custom GPT. And then when you finish your research, you can add it in as a knowledge base. So for editing, it's a phenomenal tool, right? So if I put in my writing, I can just like you would with a spell check or a grammar check, you're checking all your logic, you're checking all your timelines. Because I'll write something like, wait a minute, that timeline's off. It can just align all my timing. This character, what they're wearing, I can just, all of that can be really streamlined to make sure that I'm staying on point. Otherwise, like I said, that's something that takes a lot of energy. Like I love editing because it's the difference between like good and great. So I do a lot of editing in multiple cycles. Like I'll put the book down for a week and then read it and I see it totally differently. So I'm a good editor of my work with distance, but the AI tools can edit at any point. And editing in terms of, fact checking, make sure the history is correct, making sure all the tones are correct. I also analyze things, what's the beat and the cadence. So I used Fibonacci, so like 0, 0, 0, 1, 3, 5, 8, 13, like all those, and those are like major reveals within those chapters. And then I'll use different like, sacral glyphs and stuff for symbolism, and they're at the end of each chapter. So I grew up around, reading the Hardy Boys and all these different mysteries. I love, clues and solving problems and, embedded symbolism. So I just kind of grew up in that world. So same thing, AI is great for coming up with an entire map to make sure that my sacred geometry is correct, that my story beat and cadence is correct. Any research, as opposed to me going to the library, I can pull in and put into that knowledge base to help with all the fact checking and the history. The other thing is I'll produce a document and I'll speak more than I type, right? Because I can talk at 140 words per minute. I can't type at 140 words per minute, and it's very exhausting. So I speak, and then it translates it into text, and then I can put it into, ChatGPT and have it read back to me so I can listen. So I'll read it on screen, but I can't read all the time because that's exhausting. Sometimes I read on screen. Sometimes very rarely, I'll print it out, get a test copy of the book, make notes in the margin. And then also I love listening to it. So I try to use all my different senses to process that information. So it's more of an immersion process. I'm looking at it, I'm reading it, I'm listening to it, I'm telling other people about it. So I try to use all the different senses to be able to really experience the same thing and getting into it. Because it's world building, right? So I have to be able to see that world that's going on. Also, there's a lot of boring stuff that you have to do. It's like you're going to a bookstore and they want to do an event. They want you to fill out this big form. You want to partner with someone, you got to fill out all these different forms. That takes up a lot of time and energy. I've already written that information. I take the form, I go into my knowledge base, fill out all this information, I copy and paste, and I send it off. So writing marketing emails, filling out forms, writing, press releases, events like that. I've already written that stuff. I don't need to write that again. That's just like converting it over into a different format. AI is great for that. I could go on and on and on, but that's a big part of it. So doing all this stuff, doing everything but the most creative, authentic thing. That's mine. I want to do that. I don't let AI do that. That's me, right? Having it do everything else so I can put all my energy and time and resources into the creative part.
That's amazing. I mean, it sounds like you've been able to use AI to call out maybe some areas of or like weaknesses and then sort of filled those holes with AI and AI tools that can help support your book writing. So that's really amazing. If anyone has any other questions about AI tools, feel free to drop them in the chat. We got a question from Peter who asked or said it was a very intriguing first chapter. How long did it take to put the book together?
So I mean, it's weird because there's parts of the book, like I said, that are from my childhood memories, right? But really, the beginning of the research, I think, started with the first book. But again, I had no idea I was going to write this book. But a lot of the research that I did, my first two books, came through on this. But if I had to say, like the Bloom Protocol from start to finish, it took less than 6 months to publish. And crazier thing, like the bulk of that probably happened in the last 2 months. And I did all the publishing myself. Like I designed the book cover. I went through 42 iterations of the book cover, but I designed it. And I showed other people to get feedback, but I designed that. I did the layout. I had to convert it over into the PDF, get the ISBN number. I did it all because I love doing that. I don't want to do it again the next time. I want to bring some people in to help me. I want to bring in another person to help me edit it. But the first time I like to do everything soup to nuts so I know the process. Now, if I needed to hire someone, I can talk to them and tell them exactly what I want to do in the next book, and the next book, and the next book. So I love being, involved in the whole process, soup to nuts, and really getting my hands dirty with it, one time, like everything. And now I can see what parts I love and what parts I really would love to have someone else do that. Like I did all the editing. I'd love to do not all the editing, 50% of the editing. You know what I mean?
Yeah, yeah. Editing can definitely take a toll over time. I feel like going back into your work and like you said, having those spaces in between can really help. Was there one chapter or a particular section of the book that was maybe most exciting to write or you felt like you like really poured yourself into the most?
Yes and no. I mean, I went through so many iterations, but I think that everything about the chain, because the chain symbolizes so much. And there's a big part in there about the ledger of reckoning. And it's funny because when I was writing that, this whole story came out about the account, like the accountability archives, where they're keeping track of all the stuff that's been happening in history, all the bad people doing bad stuff. And I'm like, that's what I'm doing. But it's about, kind of like truth and consequences, truth and reconciliation. So it's people being able to, like, how do you move forward unless you like not just apologize, but say, hey, this is like I said with me, like I'm owning up to my mistakes. Now, how do I do better? If I never do that, I'm never going to grow. I'm never going to get better. So the ledger of reckoning is about that, but the chain is also about the blockchain because all history keeps getting wiped out. But if you put it on the blockchain, it's forever. It's immutable. You can't go and change that. So I just love that idea about that. And a lot more of that comes out in book two, right? So sometimes I had to like, ooh, I don't want to go too deep because that's book two. So there's a lot of things that got covered in book one, and I really get to drill in more with certain characters, certain scenes, and certain concepts like that. And then Iron Mountain, where literally things are archived, like all these corporate secrets are archived there. I just touch on it, but I really go into that in book two. So sometimes I had to hold myself back from going too deep because it's a trilogy. So I very much wanted to say, okay, here's a little, mini cliffhanger. Like every chapter ends with a mini cliffhanger, and then the book ends with, obviously with the cliffhanger before we go to book two.
Cannot wait to share links out with folks and get more people reading it and read it myself. I read your book even myself. So it's really exciting. I am curious if you can kind of paint a vision for us on what I know you mentioned trilogy, but and we talked about world building. Like, what's your vision? Where do you see your books growing into?
I really see this going into a limited film series. So like 3 seasons, 10 chapters each. I just connected with a film production company in Philadelphia, and they want to help me make a short series. Like they have like a film studio. They do post-production, they do drones. So they could take this and do like 10 episodes, but 1 minute, really super short, which would be a great trailer preview for what I want to do, like really on the big screen. But I just played around with Sora too, like the video stuff, and I can come up with, I can take from what's in my mind and put it into really cool video. So I can't wait to see what I can do working with somebody who is like a full-blown like film production studio, green screens, drones, nothing is off the table. That's what that would be just, make my heart, explode with joy is taking this to the next level. I don't want to rush ahead because I love this whole process, but I can do two things at once. I can write a book and a screenplay at the same time because it's very related.
So exciting. I cannot wait to hear about the film moving forward on the next steps of that. I think that's really, really exciting. And it just adds to the imagery. I mentioned earlier that I really, like, as you were reading, there was one analogy towards hive mind or towards a hive mind, I guess, like thinking. And then there was another one around brown eyes that, like, literally captivated me. I felt like I was like lost in the reading. I was like, well, no, hold on. And is that something that's just characteristic of your work, or is that something that you found was like born out of this book?
I think both. I think both. So in studying, and writing about regenerative economics, like I said, I really studied, certain parts of nature, like not everything, but I really got into biomimetic design, how being able to be able to explain nature, not from a scientific standpoint, but from more of an artistic writer's viewpoint. So that's embedded in here. So the hive mind is very much there. And if you heard about like the mycelium network, so below the trees, all the roots and all the essential ingredients and the soil and all the different insects and how they all talk to one another and communicate. That's to me a metaphor for how we can get back to connecting as humans. We're connecting with nature, we're connecting with source, we're connecting with whatever you believe in. But for me, it's being able to also reconnect human to human in communities, selectively where we feel safe and appreciated, but reconnecting as much as possible. And that goes back to that hive mind. So it could be something good, it could also be something bad, but it's being connected overall.
I think that that's something that's like so almost like interesting about the conversation that we're having right now because we're talking about it with this landscape of AI behind us. And a lot of the assumption is that, like, sort of, or the thought is that AI will take the humanity out of things like what you're doing, fueling your creativity in a book. And so it really seems like throughout this conversation, you found a way to leverage AI for you, but also not overextend its usage. Like it very much resonates with me that you are very conscious of what role you want AI tools to play and where that suits.
Absolutely. So I think that's an important part you said. It's very intentional, right? It's intentional design. I know because I teach courses around AI, so that's been very beneficial to me. Like one, people were confused, they were fearful, they were anxious. So it was good for me to hear that because I'm comfortable with it, but not everyone else is. That really helped me to be more understanding and compassionate because I talked about the ethics of it, but the intentional design is different, right? I can be ethical, but how do you be ethical? You have to be responsible, and how to be responsible, you have to listen to other people and talk about and hear their fears. Because some folks are just like, no, don't use it at all. Like that's just not realistic. So I think what's in between that, right? It's the intentional design. So something like, yeah, I could use it for everything, but that's not my design. I use it for things that are going to make my life easier and allow me to be more creative and be more authentic and be more innovative, and all that. So that's for me, and everyone can have their own intentional design, right?
Yeah, absolutely. I think so. Gina shared that Philip Carr-Gomm, not sure if you're familiar, but he does some wonderful work with connecting with the mycelium and druidic meditation. This might be interesting. And then Austin had a question more related to our conversation about AI, but do you worry about issues about proprietary information or privacy when it comes to using AI in your creative process?
Yes, absolutely. So if there's something it's a great question and it's a good point. So in simple terms, on most tools, you have to say, if I put it in there, I'm giving it away. So if there's something you really want to keep private and you don't want it to be put out there, then I keep it in an analog way, right? I can do a voice recording just for myself and not put it onto a public AI server or system. I could write things. I still write a lot by, on clipboards and notepads and and whiteboards. I love that, and different index cards. So I still like that analog stuff. So you can keep things like very, very private. You can also turn off training. So in ChatGPT, there's literally, a toggle button to turn off training. Does it mean it's 100% private? No. It just means that they're acknowledging they're not going to use your data, your chat, your thread to train your system. So there's a little bit of a firewall. It's not 100% secure or private. I acknowledge that. The other thing is, there's timing, right? So if you have something really big that you want to keep private before an announcement or before a release, then keep it private. You know, don't tell the world. I think the other flip side of it is there's just a lot of empowerment by saying, "No, this is what I'm doing. This is the name of my book." Whether you want to go trademark it, register it, copyright, whatever, those tools are available. But there's also a lot of power, and I learned that the hard way is going on camera, saying, here's my face, here's who I am, this is what I'm working on, putting it out there. Now, someone comes after that. I have a stamp that says, no, Michael Muyot wrote this book. He claimed it. He did this. So there's a balance. So I think there depends on context. What is it? What is the sensitivity nature of it? What is your reasoning for keeping it private? And then same thing, coming up with an intentional design that works for you to keep things private if you decide to do it. But the best is analog. If you really want to keep something private, write it down on pen and paper.
That's amazing advice. And I think that taking an approach that's tailored towards you is definitely, I think, where you'll get most out of AI. And that's reflected even in your book. Karen had a question, not necessarily related to your work, but was wondering if you might have insight on whether ChatGPT, the paid version, protects your data or the information that you're funneling through versus the free account. And they're asking if that's correct.
Yeah. So again, I don't think they're not in the business of protecting your data. They're not. So I recommend just taking that 100% as your own agency and doing whatever you can. If I put something on there, I don't think it's 100% safe, free or paid versions. I just don't. So if there's something really sensitive or really private, keep it off there. If not, there's ways around it. So you can, give them half the information, not the full information. It really depends on what it is, so it's hard to give complete, suggestions without knowing more of the context. But I would say that overall, they're multi-billion-dollar corporations. Their number one motive is to make money for themselves and their shareholders. That's their motivation. So it's not data privacy, and right now there's a huge AI bubble because the companies are just worth more than they're actually worth, right? They're not worth $1 trillion. They're worth billions, and it's overinflated. A lot of it is going into AI infrastructures and data centers to train and train and train and do all these things. You're going to see a shift. One of the people who left OpenAI, Mira Murati, one of the first women in tech doing great stuff with AI. They're building new models, and I would really, take a look at what they're doing, because they're taking like the small, instead of the large language models, the small language models that you could build and train for specific purposes, which are great for research, for universities, for communities like Mentra. Like that's going to be the future, is creating these smaller bespoke language models for communities. So I would pay attention to that as opposed to the big corporations that have different motives and incentives. They're looking for massive amounts of information to train on, as opposed to small communities where you have a common vision and bond and set of like kind of values.
I love that advice. Thank you so much, Michael. I think that really helps people or allows people to engage in the platform a little bit more, hopefully with a little bit more freedom, knowing that you're really in charge of the way that maybe not the way that your data is used, but to what degree your data can be used based on how much you put in the platform. So this was really amazing, Michael. Feel free to drop in any of the links where folks can buy your book. And if there's anything else you'd like to share before we close out, we're coming out at the 5:30 mark, so just wanted to bring us back.
Yeah, no, that'd be great. Do you have the link handy, Steph, for my link tree or for the?
I do not, however,
Let me grab it.
amazing. Yeah, and then also I'll send that along after to everyone after our call today too. And then over the next week, and Michael, I'll send it over the recording your way as well. But over the next week, we'll be sharing the recording and our conversation.
All right, perfect. Let me just grab the link if I can.
Gina says cliffhangers make me batty, but cliffhangers keep you reading.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah, but I mean they're normal cliffhangers. It's not too bad.
Not
That's
being stuck.
I put my link tree in there that has everything. It has the link to this book, my other books, how to get in contact with me, everything. My
Amazing.
socials. Yeah, and I forgot to say one thing that I thought was really cool was I used to create focus groups and town halls like in person. So I had that knowledge. So I created all these virtual focus groups and user groups for book clubs and bookstore owners, literary agents. And I was like, be super critical. I'm like, give me all this feedback. And I created my neurospicy user groups, my young adults. That was invaluable. So during the process, getting real-time feedback for these personas, and they gave really good advice. They gave really good feedback. And that's something that, would cost a lot of money to do in real life. Because we've done that, in my previous life in corporate America. Setting up focus groups are really expensive. And I got great feedback. I would highly recommend doing that for different purposes, but definitely for writing.
That's amazing. And so many good tips and tricks. And just we're truly learning from a professional who has done it, walked the path, and is doing it ethically. So thank you, Michael, so much for joining. Like I said, everyone will be sending along the link tree and hopefully we have another reason to celebrate you, Michael, over the next few months. But we can't wait to hear how your book sales are going and how everything's growing for you.
Well, thank you so much. And one thing that I'm learning is reviews. If when people read it, if you could leave me a review on Goodreads and Amazon, I would really appreciate it. That's something that helps out a lot with the algorithm. So, anybody who reads it and would be willing to write a review, I'd really appreciate it.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. I'm sure we have some folks that after reading, they'd be interested.
Okay, awesome.
Yeah. All right, everyone. Thank you so much, Michael. Thanks, everyone, for joining. I hope you have a great rest of your day.
Thank you. My pleasure. Bye.
Bye.